Hello everyone, in this video we are looking at the short answer questions of Unit 1 Introduction, a very brief history of logic of Block 2 of the paper Humanism and Logic of Srinarayana Guru Open University. So let's get started. First question, what is the relevance of studying logic? Studying logic is highly relevant because it helps us develop the ability to make correct and valid reasoning in various aspects of life. It trains our minds to think clearly, structure arguments properly, and communicate our thoughts effectively. By learning the principles of logic, we can avoid logical fallacies and reach sound conclusions. This is crucial for making informed decisions, solving problems, and engaging in productive discussions or debates. Logic is not just an academic pursuit but a practical tool that enhances our critical thinking skills and improves our day to day reasoning abilities. Second question, what is the difference between propositions and arguments? Propositions are the fundamental building blocks of reasoning, asserting something is the case or not. They are statements that can either be true or false, such as all humans are mortal. Arguments, on the other hand, are relational arrangements of propositions consisting of premises and conclusions. An argument involves affirming one proposition based on other propositions. For example, all humans are mortal. Socrates is human. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. While propositions are individual statements, arguments are structured combinations of propositions that aim to support or infer a conclusion. Third question, define deductive reasoning with an example. Deductive reasoning is a form of reasoning that starts with general principles or premises and arrives at specific conclusions. It follows the principle that what is true of the whole is true of the parts. In a deductive argument, if the premises are true, the conclusion must necessarily be true as well. An example of deductive reasoning is all mammals are warm blooded. Whales are mammals. Therefore, whales are warm blooded. The conclusion is logically necessitated by the premises and cannot be false if the premises are true, making it a valid deductive argument. Fourth question, what is the central task of deductive logic? The central task of deductive logic is to discriminate between valid and invalid arguments. A valid deductive argument is one in which the conclusion follows logically and necessarily from the premises. If the premises of a deductive argument are true, then the conclusion must be true. On the other hand, an invalid deductive argument is one in which the conclusion does not follow logically from the premises, even if the premises are true. Deductive logic provides techniques and methods to evaluate the logical form of arguments and determine whether they are valid or invalid, ensuring the preservation of truth from premises to conclusion. Fifth question, what is the difference between traditional and symbolic logic? The primary difference between traditional and symbolic logic lies in their approach and representation. Traditional logic is also known as Aristotelian logic, is concerned with the relation between subject and predicate terms of propositions. It deals with both the form and content of thought and has limited use of symbols. On the other hand, symbolic logic or modern logic focuses on the internal structure of propositions and arguments using an extensive system of specialized symbols to represent logical concepts and operations. Symbolic logic is purely formal in nature, abstracting away from the content of thought and employing mathematical precision in its analysis, while traditional logic revolves around syllogisms. Symbolic logic analyzes the logical connections and relationship within and between propositions. Sixth question: what is the difference between truth and validity? Truth and validity are distinct concepts that apply to different elements of logic. Truth and falsity are attributes of individual propositions or statements. A proposition is true if it accurately represents a fact or state of affairs in the world, and false if it does not. Validity, on the other hand, is an attribute of arguments that refers to the logical relationship between the premises and the conclusion. An argument is valid if it is impossible for the conclusion to be false when the premises are true. An argument is valid if it is impossible for the conclusion to be false when the premises are true, regardless of the truth and falsity of the individual propositions. In other words, validity concerns the logical form of the argument, while truth concerns the factual correctness of the propositions involved. Seventh question: what are the four types of categorical propositions? In traditional logic, there are four types of categorical propositions based on their quality, that is affirmative or negative, and quantity, that is universal or particular. First one, universal affirmative or a proposition. In that, all S is P. Example, all humans are mortal. Second one, universal negative or E proposition. In that, no S is P. Example, no reptiles are mammals. Third one, particular affirmative or I proposition. In that, some S is P. Example, some animals are domestic. Fourth one, particular negative or O proposition. In that, some S is not P. Example, some birds are not flightless. These categorical propositions form the basis for constructing syllogisms and deductive arguments in traditional logic. Eighth question: what is the principle of inductive reasoning? The principle of inductive reasoning is that what is true of a part is true of the whole. Inductive reasoning starts with particular instances or observations and arrives at a general conclusion or principle. Unlike deductive reasoning, which aims for certainty, inductive reasoning aims to establish probable conclusions based on the given evidence or data. The principle of induction assumes that if something is observed to be true in a significant number of cases, it is likely to be true in all similar cases. To put it differently, inductive conclusions are not guaranteed to be true, as there may be expectations or counterexamples to the generalization. Ninth question: what is abductive reasoning? Abductive reasoning, also known as inference to the best explanation, is a form of reasoning that starts with an observation or set of observations and seeks to find the simplest and most likely explanation for those observations. It involves forming a conclusion that, if true, would best explain the given facts or data. Abductive reasoning is ampliative, meaning that the conclusion goes beyond the information contained in the premises. It is a process of reasoning backward from the observation to the most plausible clause or Explanation. Abductive reasoning is commonly used in fields like medical diagnosis, scientific research, and detective work, where the goal is to find the most probable explanation for the observed phenomena. 10th question. What are the key differences between deductive and inductive arguments? The key differences between deductive and inductive arguments lie in their starting points, principles, the nature of conclusions, and validation criteria. A. Starting point. Deductive arguments start with general principles or premises, while inductive arguments start with particular facts or observations. B. Principle. Deduction follows the principle that what is true of the whole is true of the parts, while induction follows the principle that what is true of the part is true of the whole. C. Nature of conclusions. In valid deductive arguments, if the premises are true, the conclusion is necessarily true with certainty. In inductive arguments, even if all premises are true, the conclusion is probable but not guaranteed. Validation. Deductive arguments are either valid or invalid, while inductive arguments are evaluated as stronger or weaker based on the supportive evidence. E. Leap. Inductive arguments involve an inductive leap for premises to conclusion, while deductive arguments do not involve such a leap. Overall, inductive arguments aim for logical certainty and validity, while inductive arguments aim for probability and generalization based on observed instances. These are some of the important short answer questions of the chapter Introduction, a very brief history of logic of Block 2 of the paper Humanism and Logic. Thanks for listening.